So, the other day, there was another mass shooting that caught the attention of the nation. Gee, must be Tuesday. Not to sound callous because I'm not, the loss of any innocent life is obviously an unforgivable tragedy, and I cannot even comprehend the suffering of the friends and family whose lives were so unjustly taken from them by a crazed madman. But if you don't remember this shooting, I wouldn't be that surprised because it's quickly being memory holed. And that's what I want to talk about today. While it will always sound cliche and perhaps cynical to say it, sincerely my deepest sympathies go out to the victims' loved ones. And I think that's why we need to talk about this being essentially forgotten by the media as quickly as it has been, when so many other shootings are remembered at length, not just for days or for weeks, but for months. So why might it be that the mainstream media wants you to forget about the shooting at the Capital Gazette? I mean, as with any other mass shooting, can't it be blamed on a product of American gun ownership? Well, of course I would say no, obviously not. Insane, unhinged lunatics kill people, guns don't kill people. Or at least not in a vacuum, right? But we aren't even really seeing the anti-gun rhetoric that we've seen with so many other recent mass shootings. Still, it clearly must have been political in nature though, right? I mean, what shooting doesn't have some ulterior political motive? Well, while this was a heinous loss of life, of course, as such, it did not take long for the usual politics to begin to once again enter into it, that's for sure. However, again, it seems we're quickly forgetting about this. And don't get me wrong about the politics either here, fam. That was a bipartisan issue of finger-pointing, and it often is. While the blue checkmark dipshits on Twitter and esteemed outlets like the New York Times, Politico, and Reuters were quick to blame Trump for his criticisms of the mainstream media as being wholly responsible for the shooting, it was Trump himself who might as well aimed the weapon. So was Sean Hannity equally as quick to finger Maxine Waters. Oh god, not like that. Oh please, no, I do not need that imagery in my head. But anyway, Hannity immediately blamed Auntie Maxine for similarly inciting political violence based on her recent statements in which she called for Republicans and Trump voters to be publicly shamed, harassed, and even denied service. Though you know what, I have to wonder what Maxine's hot take would be if a gay Trump supporter asked a liberal bakery to make for him and his fiancée a wedding cake. Hey Auntie Max, you think you could round up another group of 10 bored millennials with the promise of free finger sandwiches to stand around checking their phones so you can publicly answer that one, eh? Anyway, the point is, while I don't agree with Hannity that Maxine Waters was somehow responsible for ramping up violent behavior alone, only because she's certainly not alone, he does have a bit of a point that the left has become increasingly rabid in their calling for politically based violence or action against the right. And just in case even from the outset that seemed unlikely given the target of the shooting, the Capital Gazette, being a media outlet. It's still true, as we'll see exemplified several times just in this video, that, yeah, the left has been calling for violence, so Hannity wasn't completely wrong. Yet I point out Hannity's similar speed to point fingers before the bodies of those who tragically lost their lives were even cold, to illustrate that both sides of the political aisle have the propensity to engage in this kind of behavior. But the wave from the left to instantly and overwhelmingly lay said bodies solely at the feet of President Donald Trump was massive in its scope and rapidity. Within minutes of this news being reported, the blue checkmark literal whos were decrying the president and claiming seemingly direct responsibility from him for the shooting. Why? Because Trump recently called fake news, and listen here it is, fake news.
A few days ago, I called the fake news the enemy of the people, and they are. They are the enemy of the people.
The enemy of the people. Did Trump say to publicly attack, shame, and harass journalists like, I don't know, someone else we know in response to Republicans and Trump supporters? No, he didn't even say the media in general. He said fake news. What was that, Mr. President?
In fact, in covering my comments, the dishonest media did not explain that I called the fake news the enemy of the people, the fake news. They dropped off the word fake. And all of a sudden, the story became the media is the enemy. They take the word fake out.
Fake news, yeah. Well, Trump certainly caught the brunt of this at first, being, the typical center of lefty ire and the source of all the world's woes despite improving the economy, providing tax cuts, and moves towards fucking world peace, which of course, the left is now suspiciously admonishing. Milo Yiannopoulos probably just had his career ended over the statements that he made a few days before, which, I kind of thought his career was already dead.
Stop! He's already dead!
Anyway, Milo had said shortly before the shooting that he, quote, couldn't wait for the vigilante squads to start gunning journalists down on sight. Oof, not a good look, that's for sure, Milo. Although, not highly dissimilar from a very familiar quote from fellow notorious mass shooter and leader of the right-wing death squads, Samuel Heidenstein. This quote that he particularly made in the past in response to another journalist. Thus, in light of comments like Milo's and Trump's, the media and all of their blue check marks were assured of the right-wing political leaning of the obviously white male shooter, going so far as to post shit like this. Quote, he dropped his MAGA hat at the scene. And yes, by the way, he was asked to resign for this. A tweet which was later removed because, oopsie, it turned out that the guy was arguably Hispanic and motivated by an ongoing feud with the newspaper that had lasted for half of a decade. And I know it's hard for some of those media dickweeds to remember anything before Trump took office, like the fact that Obama separated illegal migrant kids from their parents, but Trump has only been in office for a year and a half. He could not have been responsible for this shit. I mean, unless you think he's playing some kind of long game where he incited this feud years ago just so he could plan this 5-6 years in the future.
What if time travel were not only possible, but had already happened? If someone in this world were to have this power, who would you want it to be? Well, it's not that person. It's Donald Trump.
Then again, I've heard that kind of stuff about the Russia collusion, so you never know. You really can't make that shit up now, can ya? Anyway, the media was foaming at the mouth and chomping at the bit to finally have a legitimate excuse to play the victim. So they latched onto this story like flies to pig shit. As soon as I heard the news, I made a prediction that one of two things would happen. And astoundingly, I was right, although not in the way I thought I would be. I thought, one, if the shooter was in any way, and I do mean any way, arguably politically motivated, every single media outlet would shit themselves in excitement and spend the next 7 years of Trump's presidency, yes, that's right, 2 scoops, 2 genders, 2 justices, 2 wants, 2 terms, lads, wallowing in self-pity, and demanding empathy and tears over the deaths of other people as representative of the fact that their ratings are tanking. In other words, we're doing poorly, so we're going to use the deaths of innocents to prop ourselves up. And 2, if the shooter wasn't politically motivated, they would immediately pivot back onto the anti-gun rhetoric and narrative, reigniting the public outrage on the national level over the ease at which guns can be obtained in this country. And it turned out I was right. Except it wasn't one or the other, it wasn't 1 or 2, it was 3. They did both anyway, but it didn't really turn out so well. So again, that's why we've seen this story suspiciously vanish from the public mind. So today, I want to go over a little case study in Chanks, because while I know covering the Young Turks is a bit like punching a handicapped child, but the series of shifting the blame, finger-pointing, then playing the victim, and then crying about guns, as I predicted, all happened pretty much in real time over the course of 3 days at TYT. And since then, there has been silence, not just from them, but from most media outlets about this Annapolis shooting. And I had to ask, why might this possibly be? This was a massive news story. Well, friends, I'm gonna tell you why. Because nothing about it fits with any of their desired narratives. To the point where we will watch Cenk Uygur lie mid-sentence and engage in some of the absolute finest gourmet hypocrisy I have seen from the Young Turds in at least months, in a desperate attempt to spin this story, which frankly is just not spinnable. It's not always about politics, you vapid, self-absorbed weasels. Sometimes tragedies just happen and there's there's nothing anyone could have done to prevent this one, except maybe, just maybe, having another person armed and trained in the use of a firearm at the Capital Gazette. And that would never have been the case at the Gazette, for reasons which we will discuss. This is why the media doesn't want you to remember Annapolis, and you should hashtag remember Annapolis. They don't want to remind you of the innocents who lost their lives at the Capital Gazette. They want you to forget about them, because any story that can't be spun need be hung. So today's video, there will be fewer graphs and figures, although there will be graphs and figures, and more old-fashioned media analysis. Emphasis on the anal, because I'm about to delve deep into the verbal diarrhea that is constantly expelled by the Young Turks. Anyway, let's watch this all occur over the course of 3 days at TYT, starting the day of the shooting before any real information had been released about the shooter. We just knew the event had happened. So after covering said very scant details known at the time, Cenk immediately, oh wowee, imagine my shock, blames guns and gun owners for it.
Of course there's an active shooter. There's always an active shooter because we have 250 million guns in the country. And the right wing, which has lost its mind in its entirety, celebrates it because we have a country that has lost its mind. Okay, let's just give everybody guns. Everybody gets guns.
Really, Chunk? Everybody gets a gun? Is this Oprah? And the nation you claim has lost its mind thereby? Here's the whole, it's easier to purchase an assault weapon than cough syrup narrative right here. There it is.
I'm sorry.
I do think the founding fathers, though, they could no more conceive of an AK-47 or an AR-15 firing on full automatic than they could have conceived of a spaceship. Okay? These weapons were not conceived of, were not understood, were not imagined in the context of the time when the amendment was authored. And we ought to have a real debate in this country about whether we want military weapons of war in the hand of every Joe who wants to go in and buy 30 of them. It is harder to buy cough medicine than it is to buy an AK-47 or 50 of them.
You know, Cenk, and this actually goes out to the entirety of the gun-grabbing media, if it is so easy to legally obtain a, quote, assault weapon, why don't you send one of your little lackeys, I don't know, say Hassan Piker, since he's such a sharp lad.
An independent study showed that professors 12-to-1 are registered Democrat versus Republican.
Why? Is it because they don't have jobs at Goldman Sachs? Maybe get the Goldman Sachs
again, let me finish it. Well, no, it's actually, so if you insult conservatives, I'll insult liberals. It's because conservatives are more likely to go make a bunch of money and liberals aren't. So you want to get to there, we'll say that.
So I think,
yeah,
I mean, singular.
Conservatives are more likely to endow their professorship.
Out into the field and prove it. Have him attempt to purchase a, quote, assault weapon in the state of Maryland, go through the background check process, and then, really, I'd like you to get him to apply for a permit to carry. Since it's assault weapons that are the problem, right? Except the piece of garbage who murdered those people at the Capital Gazette was armed with a pump-action 12-gauge shotgun, not a semi-automatic weapon, because Maryland, as we'll see, has some of the strictest gun laws in the country.
You know what? I'm just gonna go shoot people. No, they're looking for honor and glory in their twisted minds in almost all these cases, and plus there's just the people who really should be locked up in asylums, and we don't do that either, and so...
You're right, Cenk. Some people are crazy, and they will do anything for glory because their brains are fucked up. You know, like illegally obtaining a firearm, not legally, as this guy did. And they will do the same horrific, repulsive shit anyway. Maybe if Maryland didn't have some of those strictest of handgun laws, as I just mentioned, someone at the Capital Gazette could have been armed and stopped this lunatic. Or, you know, he could have been locked up in a mental health institution or hospital. I agree with you there. It's too bad we've been closing all of those en masse since the federal government took over the mental health system under John Kennedy, a system that continues in a Frankenstein sort of form to this day, encouraging outpatient care and treatment, particularly something called self-care, under the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. That emphasizes mental health for the total population rather than mental illness, treatment of those who are seriously mentally ill with inpatient care for serious lunatics like Ramos, a man the government and court systems all knew was a murderous psycho, given he had threatened to kill Gazette employees on the docket and had been stalking a woman for a prolonged period of time, all of which pretty much everyone knew about, and yet he was roaming free. I'm not blaming the failings of the mental health system and our nation's ability to effectively handle the issues of mental health entirely on the Democrats or anything like that either, friends. No one has managed to clean up this mess, or even really bother to try and clean up John F. Kennedy and Jimmy Carter's messes when it came to the state of mental health in this country. And, well, the state. The federal government, as usual, doing such a great job at managing a complex system through excessive and often completely backwards massive spending. The problem is, because of this bloated system, we effectively treat all mental patients the same, which is great if all you care about is forced equality of everybody being the same, but not so great if you understand that everyone is not the same, and you want to keep murderous nutjobs like Ramos out of the general population. If you, dear viewer, or more importantly, you chunk, since you're sitting up there on your dais proselytizing about this, are interested, there is an excellent book I've been listening to on just this topic by Dr. E. Fuller Torrey, American Psychosis: How the Federal Government Destroyed the Mental Illness Treatment System, which will be linked below in a neat little Amazon affiliate thingy. Since I don't like to show for myself much, here's a book you could look into instead. But anyway, back to Chunk.
We then have the president inciting people nonstop. So, look, I'm going to get to the second way the Republican Party has lost its mind, but I want to go to video 13. This was just, what was this, less than a week ago, right, in South Carolina. Donald Trump. Well, take a look.
A few days ago, I called the fake news the enemy of the people, and they are. They are the enemy of the people. Because they have no sources, they just make them up when there are none. Say that we can't criticize their dishonest coverage because of the First Amendment. You know, they always bring up the First Amendment.
So here it is. As with the rest of the legacy media ilk, Chunk immediately blames Trump for the shooting. Notice how the part where Trump was referring specifically to fake news, you know, what I played earlier, was omitted, really boils my Brazil nuts.
Okay to call them the enemy of the people? Especially when you're the president of the United States? No, not remotely okay.
Good thing he didn't call the media the enemy of the people then, did he, Chank? No, he called fake news the enemy. Oh, but I guess you just accidentally left that part out. You're bad.
How many times has this guy incited people? He says, oh, you gotta attack him, I'll pay for your bills. Attack, attack, attack. And then Charlottesville happens. He learns nothing from it.
And here we are, right fucking back to Charlottesville again. Do you have any other examples? A single other one? Because this is the one you constantly go to as representative of an epidemic of right-wing violence.
And then he goes on to say, there's very good people on both sides. There's very good people on the Nazi side?
No, Chank. For the millionth time, he is referring to the people who showed up there in protest of American history being revised, destroyed, and forgotten when he said there were good people on both sides. We have been over this ad nauseum. What about the very good people on your side and the commie side, Chunk, huh? Like the professor and leader of Antifa group Redneck Revolt, Dwayne Dixon, who by his own admission, bragging on social media, aimed a firearm at James Fields, the driver of the vehicle which struck and killed Heather Heyer, and an action for which Dwayne Dixon was himself charged with 2 misdemeanors for bringing semi-automatic weaponry to a protest. Chunk? Was he a very good person? What about left-wing nutjob James Hodgkinson, who shot Steve Scalise last year? What about him, Chank? Odd you guys always forget about that kind of stuff, and we'll get further into your hypocrisy here in just a moment because, oh folks, this is just the tip of the iceberg and the tip of my dick in reaming, Chank.
Why do I blame all the voters, which no one else says, oh my God, don't criticize the Republican voters. No, I will criticize them because they love guns and they say, give it to everybody, give it to everybody. No,
Yeah, that's right, Chank. Many of us do love guns, but just pay attention there. Did you catch that, friends? Chank said he outright blames all of the voters, not just Trump, not just people who own guns and voted for Trump, all of us. Anyone who voted for Trump or who currently supports him is responsible for the deaths of these people because we value our Second Amendment right, for example, or because we just support Trump. But doesn't it kind of seem like old Chank's channeling a little bit of anti-Maxine here too? Are they not sort of spreading the same message? All Trump voters are to blame. All deserve to be condemned and shunned and shamed. I know how much you love that scene from Game of Thrones, and oh, the irony that you're supporting an extremely conservative religious organization when you shout that always brings a smile to my face. But keep that in mind, what Chank just said there, as we go forward in his attempt at spinning this story, spiraling into absolute insanity.
Don't get surprised when the policies they voted for wind up murdering someone you know.
Nice attempt at cultivating the idea that gun violence is overwhelming there, Chank, huh? Yeah, you're not the one fear-mongering here at all.
In the case of the media, a poll just came out. 92% of Republicans say that the news sources report news they know to be fake, false, or purposely misleading. 92%.
Citation needed on that statistic? Oh, you don't provide one. Well, because unlike the mainstream meteor, I'm not looking to, distribute. What was that again, Mr. Trump? What did you call it?
Fake news. Fake news, fake news, fake news.
Oh yeah, the fake news that he was talking about. So I went and found your source, and here's what the report actually said. It was not that Republicans believe 92% of news coverage is fake. No, this study categorized the responses of believing news to be fake or to be misleading either a lot or sometimes in 92% of Republicans. Sometimes, Chank. What Chank also failed to mention, because of course he did, is that independents believed that the news was often fake or misleading, sometimes or a lot, 79% of the time. And even Democrats believed the mainstream news to be fake or misleading 53% of the time. Thus, resulting in, across the total US population polled here, which included 3,936 participants, the average American citizen believes that the media distributes intentionally false or misleading news a lot or sometimes in 72% of the populace, in 72% of cases. But no, there's no way I'm going to stop right there, stop with the reaming when you drop an uncited statistic that, as you can see here, groups ordinal categories like a lot and sometimes into a single factor into your graph, which thereby outputs an astonishingly high number like 92% Republican distrust in the media, and thereby you can take that statistic so it can be forwarded and further misquoted by idiots like this fat fuck. So guess what I did? I went and took a look at your individual outputs, the actual data. Props, I guess, to Axiom, the people who conducted this survey, for actually providing a link towards their data, as that's better than probably a lot of others. So, first of all, I should note that across the entire sample, 43% of respondents, that's the entire sample, said that news outlets mislead or lie or create fake news a lot. That is Republicans, Democrats, independents, and everything in between. But what I really want you to take a look at here, friends, is this sometimes category. I've highlighted it here, and I think a trend will quickly become evident as you start to look at the numbers. Just about everyone, regardless of their political affiliation, thinks that the mainstream media generates fake news, at least sometimes, to about the same approximate degrees, around 20 to 30%. And in fact, some categories of self-identified Democrats believe the media to be more distrustful, sometimes, than Republicans. While Republicans tended to think the media lies a lot in higher percentages, everyone was in agreement, it seems, that the media lies sometimes to more or less similar degrees. This is why I was suspicious when I saw the truncation of a lot and sometimes in the graphic output, because those are two very different answers. They're at an ordinal level, which means that they kind of describe one being greater than the other, but we don't know to what degrees. That's up for self-definition. We cannot define through very stringent numerical values as we would in interval or ratio level data. But neither of which, not the a lot or the sometimes output, describe what Chank just portrayed it as, oh, 92% of Republicans think all news is fake all the time. No, that's not what this says. But of course, the fat, hairy bastard just gets handed these numbers in a press release from one of his handlers and reads it off like the good corporate stooge he is, not knowing that there are actual people out there like myself who are autistic enough not to let him lie heinously. And further, to a company like Axiom, although again I appreciate that they did provide the full data, to lie through omission and misrepresentation of the data. Always remember to show your work, lads, or I'll show it for you.
As 2 postmen times 3 animal control officers divided by 2 gas meter readers makes how many bendable integrated community workers? Decode your answer now. Did you remember to carry the bomb? Good.
And actually, Cenk, I'd really like to thank you for directing me towards this study in the long run. Since the finding of the bipartisan sample forwarded that 43% of people think the media lies a lot, and 29% think they lie sometimes, that produces the 72% figure for the population at large. And that's actually considerably higher than some of the other recent polls I've seen on the subject, such as this 2017 Gallup research data on media trust, forwarded only a 66% of Americans, reporting that the media struggled separating fact from fiction. Now, those are not the exact same question, but it does indicate potentially that that has gone up in terms of media distrust over the last year. And that's exactly why I think Chunk and his cohort of mainstream media cunks were so, frankly, excited about this horrific shooting.
You never want a serious crisis to go to waste. And what I mean by that, it's an opportunity to do things that you think you could not do before.
They know that they are losing any and all credibility they had left, and at a almost exponential rate. And this event, this was a way to portray themselves as martyrs to the American public. The American public, 72% of which thinks they're a bunch of lying, disingenuous scumfucks. Oh, how sweet the nectar when their attempt to engender pity blew up in their faces, as just another one of their duplicitous lies. Let's continue, since we've got a good deal left, with Cenk accidentally calling Ramos a Republican.
92% of Republican voters say they all go into newsrooms, like the one they just shot up, and we don't know who it is in specific. I'm telling you the trends and where the right wing keeps pushing.
Yeah, like the one they just shot up. Oh, by the way, we don't know he's a Republican, but he's a Republican. Maybe they feel that way because that's what you do, Cenk. Like, you know, what you're doing here, right now. Talking completely out of your ass about a story that you have no available information on, and producing a video like this that will end up embarrassing you. This is why Hannity said the left was responsible, Cenk. Because you manipulate language in an attempt to persuade, and honestly, yes, you do incite violence. And then Anna proceeds to do the exact same thing here as Cenk just did, although I admit a bit more tactfully.
Every single day, we do hear something from the President of the United States in regard to how the media is the enemy, the media is not to be trusted, it's fake news, fake news, fake news. He keeps drawing this narrative that is incredibly dangerous, because if his voters are convinced that media sources that are critical of him are not to be trusted and that they're the enemy of the people.
Admitting that they don't know jack shit about the shooter, but it's still Trump's fault because of his narrative, which is hilarious, coming from you two bozos trying so desperately to spin this story so fast as it is wont to blast off into orbit.
And when I spun it really, really fast, it gave me the ability to fly. So I used to spin it really fast, and it would pull me off the...
Oh my God, Emma pulled you off?
The ground. It would pull me off the ground up into the air, and I would fly.
Anyway, you're disproven by your own data that you cited just a minute ago. Everyone thinks you lie at least some of the time. If this was only Trump voters, why is bipartisan faith in the media at an all-time low? Maybe stop spreading fake news and crying every day about every single fucking thing Trump does, and people will stop thinking you're, you know, fake news. Stop trying to play the victim.
What does enemy of the people mean? It means do something about it. They're your enemy, and they're here right now.
You mean like all of the many calls for violence and ostracization from the left that left Steve Scalise seriously wounded? Again, no, you wouldn't want to mention that. You wouldn't want to mention that overwhelmingly. An average person can get on Twitter and support Antifa, and that's fine. People who, I don't know, go around punching people in the face, throwing grenades, starting riots, and that's all fine, but no, there's no calls for violence at all. What about blaming all Trump voters for the death of innocent people, Cenk? Do you think that's a call to action, what you just did there? That you just implied that everyone who supports Trump is a murderer?
Milo, whether it was one of your fans or not, congratulations.
He can't wait, right?
Yeah, no, you want? No, but let's be absolutely clear. Milo wanted journalists murdered, and today they were murdered.
Interesting that Cenk has the ability to know exactly what Milo's intention was behind that statement. I mean, that's metaphysically absurd. How can I know what you think? It was horrific optics, either way, and a very classless thing for Milo to say to someone. But do you really think Milo Yiannopoulos was calling for the actual murder of journalists? Do you honestly think that? Isn't it far more likely, as he claimed, it was a shitty joke? Or is Sam Hyde being serious too,
So congratulations, Milo, you animal! You goddamn sick Nazi bastard, okay?
Oh, and there he goes, dropping the N-word. You know, the one that actually affects people's lives on the day-to-day basis at this point. Milo Yiannopoulos, the gay Jewish Nazi. Yes, he's a Nazi, and what do we do with Nazis, Cenk? Do we punch them? Yeah, nah. The left isn't inciting any political animosity here at all. Remember that, kiddos.
Okay, these are fascists.
You keep using the word. I don't think it means what you think it means.
They viciously attack their opponents. And I'm tired of the left and the media and everyone else in this country just laying down.
Oh, you're just lying down, huh? I mean, it's not like the left has ever acted violently or anything, particularly not recently. It's not like they've been the ones kind of instigating all of this animosity of late. No, here they are lying down as they heckle Homeland Security Secretary Christian Nelson at dinner. And of course, they were just lying down and taking it in the ass as they booted Speaker Sarah Huckabee Sanders from her dinner with her family, who was certainly not only a few weeks earlier insulted repeatedly to her face at the White House press dinner by this hack broad. Or how about these protesters who showed up outside of right-wing political advisor Stephen Miller's apartment to screech at him, which just a few days earlier, before this report, Anna at least lauded as being a reasonable form of protest.
The reason why I'm starting to be more open or receptive to these forms of protest is because what we've been doing has not worked. And we keep getting this messaging from the establishment and also from Republicans, Trump-supporting Republicans, that, oh, this is going to backfire. This is not going to work, right? You need to stop this. No, we're not going to stop it. We're not going to stop it because no one's interested in a civil debate. No one's interested in debating the facts. No one's interested in talking about what's really happening in the country.
Essentially calling for escalation, is that just lying down? No, you yourselves wouldn't have just supported acceleration against the right just 2 days before the shooting. It's not like you did that at all, except you totally fucking did, both of you. Specifically, didn't you, Anna? You are calling for escalation. You are calling for increased action, which at least borderlines on violence, if not is outright violent.
God damn it! People keep dying every day. When are we going to do something about it? And when we say that, we mean legally, we mean politically. Because we're not like the animals on the right.
And certainly, there hasn't been any political violence or destruction of property originating almost exclusively from the left in increasing frequency over the last 2 years. No, friends. No, you're just lying down and taking it. Oh, see, because you're not like the animals on the right, right? See what he just did? A dehumanizing statement like that. He calls right-wingers animals and then says that the right is the one engaging in dehumanization. This is some insane gaslighting bullshit. And it's why more people need to, learn more about media literacy, because otherwise it's very easy to allow this kind of garbage to slip through your radar. You're being a cognitive miser. You don't have the time to process all of this information very carefully. So Cenk can slip in directly hypocritical and backward statements like this, and people who aren't paying attention with 100% of their central route processing are going to allow it to just fall through their sort of cognitive gaps. Like you see this here too, right? See what he just did? He keeps saying, oh, we don't know the motivation of the shooter, but he's a right-winged animal. And what does the left do? Why, they never call for violence, not ever. They just want reasonable gun legislation.
We actually believe in democracy. We believe in this country. We believe in the Constitution.
Hang on a minute. No, you don't. You see this thing right here, my dear corpulent water buffalo friend? That's called the Bill of Rights. It's the first 10 amendments of the Constitution. And what's that one right there after freedom of speech? That's the right to bear arms. From my cold, dead hands, come and take it. You do not believe in this document, Cenk, when you want to strike one of our first rights from it. Even Anna seems honestly embarrassed by your over-the-top attempt at acting and crying here, Cenk. It's just pathetic. You know, I was talking to Braving Ruin not long back, and he made a good point about this, which I'll hereby refer to as Ruin's Law. If someone on my political side of the aisle makes a crass, inappropriate statement, it is always a joke. So this is a joke.
Do something about your dad's immigration practices, you feckless cunt. He listens to you.
And this is a joke. But if my political opponent makes a crass or inappropriate statement, like this, or Milo's comment about vigilante death squads, that is 100% all of the time completely serious. My point being that we all can fall into this, well, pitfall. Maybe if someone wasn't constantly drumming up political animosity and painting every Trump supporter as a fascist Nazi guilty of murder, we wouldn't be at that kind of level. Just saying.
By the way, Milo also sent a little payment to a reporter he didn't like for $14.88. 14 represents white supremacists, 88 represents Heil Hitler. So when I call him a Nazi, it is purposeful because that is what he does.
Yep, not a joke, not when you're not on my side. Once again, here I am presenting Milo Yiannopoulos, the gay, ethnically Jewish Nazi man married to a black dude. He sent $14.88 to a fellow Jewish woman, Talia Levine, who was begging for shekels. Oops, I'll be in trouble for saying that one, I guess. After she erroneously accused a wheelchair-bound, combat-injured Marine veteran and current ICE agent Justin Gerder of being a Nazi because she was too busy trying to find a Nazi to punch than to check her facts and notice that said tattoo was of a Maltese cross, the symbol of Justin's platoon. And as such, she lost her job, resigned her position as a fact-checker of all things at the New Yorker. Yeah, Milo sent her $14.88 because she was begging about how she was a victim after she did that shit. But that's clearly not a joke at all, now is it, Chunk? What about the fact that the misinformation about Mr. Garter was spread across Twitter like rapid fire, including by celebrities like Ron Perlman? Interesting you left all that backstory out of it. Interesting that you at least lied by omission. Because what was this all about again? Oh right, the media being a bunch of lying snakes who report on the way they want reality to be, rather than how reality really is. Which makes this next line so much more poignant.
But your listeners oftentimes act on your things. Now in this case, we don't know yet. We do know what the result you wanted. That is clear. You wanted to egg people on, and you wanted to incite people, so congratulations.
Nah, but I know the result you wanted, Chunk. It's too bad you got burned on that one. And I mean, it's not like you just egged people on in a video like this where you blamed all Trump supporters in general and Trump and Milo directly before you had a single fact about the shooter. You already played judge, jury, and executioner to rile your audience up against the imaginary Nazis. Except within hours, the long-term relationship of Ramos with the Capital Gazette, including his court-documented statements indicating his desire to engage in violent action against employees of the newspaper, thus ushered in a great big womp-womp for the mainstream media at forwarding their victim narrative. Except they went ahead and did it anyway. So of course, immediately begins the gun grabbing. But I want to point this out because it leads to my ultimate point on why the media will try to bury the story, and already are. It cannot be forced into their spin.
Larry Hogan has an A- rating from the NRA. In other words, the NRA loves Larry Hogan. Great job, way to block all the gun laws.
So Larry Hogan is the governor of the state of Maryland, and as such, obviously this was the perfect time to critique and demonize him for his position on firearms, for which he has done nothing to repeal or majorly impact current Maryland legislation. Cenk says Hogan gets an A- from the NRA because he's so beloved by them. Well, Cenk, you moron. Maryland is one of only 6 states that also gives above a B+ from the Giffords Law Center for strictest gun control laws, earning the state itself an A-. Owning a handgun or any type of assault weapon in the state of Maryland requires an extensive background check, and only 0.37% of gun owners are permitted for concealed carry within the state, It is a state that is surpassed in that percentage only by Delaware, Alaska, Rhode Island, New Jersey, DC, and Hawaii, in fewer numbers for concealed carry permits, and with many areas being restricted from carry at all. These strict regulations are in place to mitigate the excessive gun violence in cities such as Baltimore. Yet just this year in 2018, Baltimore was named the most dangerous city in the nation, with the vast majority of violence within the city being enacted with the use of handguns, the very same type of firearm that the state of Maryland has tried to make nearly impossible to obtain legally, let alone to carry. Government gun legislation working out great there again, huh? It's almost like if criminals want to obtain weapons, they will obtain weapons. But hang on a tick. Apparently on some level, Chunk knows that, and he knows about the incredibly strict gun laws in Maryland. And so he has to begrudgingly admit, watch him lie mid-sentence here essentially, that Larry Hogan has done nothing to ease the in-place legislation, but that's not gonna stop this bastard from still blaming him for the massacre, along with the rest of us Trump supporters. Oh no sir, that can't stop Chunk from stampeding full force into this absolutely backwards argument.
Now, Larry Hogan couldn't block some of them because they were put into place before him in Maryland, so that he is not in favor of banning automatic weapons or assault weapons, but luckily Maryland has that ban anyway. But Hogan didn't want it. Hogan didn't want it. So, and then tragedy after tragedy, and Hogan pretends to be a moderate.
Gee, again, why could it be that people think you are fake news, and that you and Auntie Maxine, along with plenty of others, are the ones actually lighting a fire under the ass of the American people to engage in extreme action when you call them all killers and Nazis and blame them for a mass murder, despite the fact that you sometimes accidentally have to tell the truth and admit they haven't done jack shit. So, now that we've covered the poor attempted gun grabbing, let's look at the video released the next day, once the shooter's identity and motive were released.
So Sean Hannity blames Maxine Waters for saying, hey, you should publicly shame Trump administration officials. He interprets that as violence, which she never said, and then blames her for the shooting somehow. I can't see the logical connection at all.
Immediately, we have what I like to call the leftist reset button.
Please test your buzzers.
That was easy. Cenk somehow forgot over a 24-hour period that he just spent 12 minutes the day before railing against Trump supporters, calling a gay Jewish man a Nazi, and heavily implying that Ramos was a hardcore right-wing Republican, all so he can shit-talk Hannity immediately for engaging in the same baseless finger-pointing. Now, somehow, yeah, how could anyone possibly mistake this statement as some kind of call for aggression or harassment of Trump supporters? Let's listen to it just in full.
Restaurant, in a department store, at a gasoline station, you get out and you create a crowd, and you push back on them, and you tell them they're not welcome.
Cenk, I don't understand. Somehow, how could Maxine be supporting that? Inconceivable.
And then he says that the left wing is unhinged and psychotic. Okay, now.
Oh, unhinged? Unhinged. Oh, how the tables have turned over 24 hours. Just yesterday, you were calling the right wing unhinged and insane and said that all Trump supporters essentially were guilty of murder, yet here you are castigating Hannity for not even doing 1/10 of what you did.
The left wing constantly says nonviolence, preaches nonviolence, is for gun control so that there is less violence, whereas the right wing is for more and more weaponry and uses that kind of.
Ah yes, again, Cenk asserts the left is against violence. Except on June 29th, the day after you released this video, a bunch of Antifa thugs threw a shock grenade into a peaceful demonstration by the right-wing group Patriot Prayer, causing a riot to break out in Portland, Oregon. Yeah, another great display of non-violence from the peaceful left here, isn't it, Cenk? Although, isn't this just the acceleration that you were talking about a few days ago, Anna? The left is as you wanted. They're getting serious. They're not lying down like you said, just days before. Actually, just one day before this, huh, Cenk? Aren't you excited? Aren't you excited about more violence coming from the left? Why do you say you want acceleration? Why do you say you don't want them to lay down? And then at the same time, pretend that the left isn't engaging in this valiant acts of violence? Because you have to smash the fash. You gotta bash them, right? Is it maybe just because you realize your side is too fucking pussy to actually stand up for themselves when they do start throwing dirty shit like grenades into groups of protesters as they immediately get BTFO'd?
Now he's pretending to be a victim because he's like, well, I was just joking about murdering journalists.
Oh, Milo's playing the victim, you know, after you straight up called him a Nazi. Like Talia Levine, who also portrayed herself as a victim after she was caught basically accusing a veteran of similarly being a Nazi. Or how about what you're doing here? You're playing the victim now, aren't you, Cenk? Cenk then proceeds to go through their comments section to find shitty responses from people saying they wish the shooting had happened at TYT. First of all, there is no evidence any of these are legitimate, particularly because they have blocked out the names of the posters. But for the sake of argument, let's say for once the Young Turks aren't lying. Guess what? People make absolutely horrible comments on every single video on this website. What makes this particularly disgusting though is that, remember, all of this self-pity is being built on the backs of the innocent dead people who were slaughtered in Annapolis just a day before they're out here crying about it. Remember, dear TYT viewers, despite the fact that, yeah, we admit there was no political motivation behind the shooting, and yeah, even though Maryland's got some of the strictest gun laws in the country, it's still the right wing that's really the violent ones that need to be stopped with our accelerative actions. By the way, we're the good boys, we've never done nothing wrong. And apparently, either the actual viewers of the Young Turks, which I think there still are some, are clueless enough to buy this, or the upvote army of bots was on the case for despite how egregious this whole "oh, woe is TYT, look at these nasty comments" sort of narrative is. All these videos have, as usual, fairly positive like to dislike ratios. Still, imagine how truly let down Cenk must have been after he discovered that they couldn't run full bore with the whole poor media narrative, and instead had to go look for some YouTube comments to prove the right and Trump are still to blame for this shooting.
How dare they? This is why people vote for Trump, because you're offending the Trump voters with your words. Spare me your nonsense tears, okay?
Why? Because, well, what else did they have left, since that victim narrative clearly wasn't working? And again, they showed at least some level of self-awareness, albeit minor, that they can't totally blame this on gun laws. But they'll do it anyway. My guns, once again, of course.
We see what you say every single day, over and over again. There is one side in this country that is over-the-top violent, and that's the right wing.
If you don't think violence is the answer, then stop publicly demonizing an entire group of people. Trump doesn't demonize the media. He castigates fake news. He doesn't come out there and say, all leftists are responsible for some kind of horrible catastrophe, like you did. You're just butt-flustered because you are, in fact, fake news. Yeah, Cenk, you are offending Trump voters when you blame them all collectively for the deaths of innocent people. You offend them all. You do more than offend them when you call them all Nazis and then call for aggressive action against Nazis. Well, Nazis, while saying the current level of action that is being output is reserved, that the left is lying down and taking it when they do shit like this. This, again, is the liberal reset button in action. Just the day before, Cenk can essentially point a finger at Trump and all of his voters and supporters for this tragedy, and only 3 days earlier, go on about how maybe the left needs to take more drastic measures, and then sit here and cry about how evil and violent the right is. Spare me your nonsense and your fake tears, Cenk. Besides Charlottesville, I brought up the Antifa professor who was aiming a gun at James Fields. Where is the right-wing violence, Cenk? Point to it. Where is it in mass? Where can you find something like this occurring on a regular basis? Where are all of the riots and the violence started and initiated by the right, who by your own words and your claim in your description here of this video are, quote, triggered by protesters outside their own homes, where you say they can run but they can't hide? Riddle me that. Who is calling for violence? Here's the point, friends. The media has been real quick to drop the Capital Gazette story for a reason. And that's because despite their deepest hopes, they cannot transform the truly tragic deaths of others into a pity party for themselves. Nor can they return to their typical trend of attempts at gun grabbing, and thus the story will ultimately be buried and forgotten. In the video I was actually working on before I decided to fast track this one, I'm going to talk about the ongoing impact of the Parkland shooting in the public, in politics, and ultimately policy, because after months now, the topic still remains of relevance, particularly in the Florida region. And after having spoken to some people from the Parkland area personally, I think it's really important that we discuss how some of these events continue to have long-lasting impact over time on, again, not just public perceptions, but ultimately on government policy. Yet quickly it seems the news cycle has, well, cycled past the unquestionably horrid deaths of these Gazette employees and the unimaginable suffering from which their families must currently be coping. Is this because they were adults rather than children or teens? Perhaps in part? Yeah. Is this because fewer people died? Perhaps in part, yeah. But overwhelmingly, I think it's because the story cannot be so easily manipulated. Ramos legally obtained his firearm within the state, a state with some of the strictest gun laws in the nation. Much like with the Parkland shooter, the police and court system were well aware of the mental health issues involved with this man, and yet no action was taken. Further, there was definitive motivation that he had, which had no relation to politics. There were no MAGA hats, no political posts on social media, nothing, but instead a clearly defined desire to take revenge on the newspaper over an ongoing dispute. What we have here instead is an absolutely atrocious event that cannot be turned into a quick soundbite to spread a political message. It is a complex issue, one of mental health first and foremost, an issue which both sides of the political spectrum have been quick to ignore or forget perhaps for just that reason. It's complicated. It also involved no assault weapon, but rather a gunman with a shotgun, who could have been quickly stopped had any of the surely brave employees of the Gazette been able to conceal carry a handgun. But given said strict gun legislation in the state, anti-gun advocates also will and did struggle to portray this as a story of necessity of gun control, yet were incapable of doing such. Thus, I anticipate that there will be no long-lasting media coverage or remembrance of those who tragically died at the Capital Gazette. One reason I decided to cover this, beyond the absolutely insufferable hypocrisy of the Young Turks on a level that astounded even me, is that someone else had a very similar thought process as I did regarding the situation and made the exact same connections. That being Amy Swearer in this article from the Daily Signal, which pretty much goes through all the same major points I have here. So I highly recommend the article if you, for some reason after this lengthy tirade, feel like reading more. Anyway, I just thought we should take a look at this pathetic media desperation and understand not only why it exists, which is a miserable attempt at maintaining relevance and generating pity, but also to illustrate why some stories not only remain in the public eye, but potentially become policymakers, while others fall to the wayside, into obscurity. It's all about spin, narrative, and politics, and really, that's beyond sad. We should remember the Capital Gazette. We should remember Annapolis. Luckily, though, as Cenk was kind enough to show us, more and more people have begun to distrust the media across all political orientations. That means their power is waning, and ultimately, we're winning. And I'm not gonna get tired of winning. If you've enjoyed this video, please be sure to like and subscribe. I'm Aiden Paladin, Altana Volt.